Let us pray. Almighty God, from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding, we thine unworthy servants, here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations, and grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsel may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the peace and tranquility of the republic, and the uniting and knitting together of all persons and estates within the same and true love and charity one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Prayer basis says, remember for those who are connected, Gary, this one our videos, so they can take care of the quorum.
Taboga, Mbezi. Mbezi.
Mm,
Oh, Majaha.
My leader. I'm happy with affair. Right.
I'm happy and
Other members, good afternoon.
Afternoon, sir.
Mr. Speaker.
Our business of today, we table with a paper. I understand the Minister of Finance and Economic Development, and the paper to table. Honourable Serame.
Yeah, good day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon. Mr. Speaker, I beg to table the financial statements, tables and estimates of the consolidated and development funds revenues 2022-2023. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The paper on the table. Clerk.
Presentation of a government bill.
Order, our members. I understand the Minister of Finance and Economic Development is a bill to present. Honourable Serame.
Honorable Speaker, I beg to present the appropriation 2022-2023 bill, 2022 bill number 2 of 2022. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The bill be read the first time.
Appropriation 2022-2023 bill, 2022, bill number 2 of 2022. First reading.
Going for second reading, Honourable Minister.
Forthwith, Mr. Speaker.
Forthwith.
Alala remove tule kam mask.
Clerk.
Na Malakone Masarame. Royal Blue.
Notice of motions and orders of the day. Appropriation 2022-2023 Bill, 2022, Bill number 2 of 2022. Second reading.
Other members. The question is that the appropriation 2022-2023 Bill, 2022 Bill number 2 of 2022 be read a second time. Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me thank you once again, Mr. Speaker, and allow me, Mr. Speaker, to take a moment also to greet the members of Parliament of the Republic of Botswana. Allow me also, Mr. Speaker, to greet all Batswana, ke a dumedisa Batswana botlhe ko gae, ke a dumedisa bomme, and I greet everyone who is joining us on the different media platforms.
Re dumetse mme.
Ne ke batla go utlwa o dumela Rashi.
Good luck, Honourable Minister.
Thank you. Ke rotsa Maskedi Pepe.
Dumela Pegzola.
O ka re mo Congresseng ya UDC.
Walakase.
Ke kopa le didimala. Mr. Speaker, I have the honor this afternoon to present to the National Assembly the budget proposals for the 2022-2023 financial year. Mr. Speaker, the 2022 budget speech marks several highlights in our development agenda as a country. Most importantly, it marks the end of the 11th National Development Plan, or NDP 11, which is a medium-term plan towards the implementation of Vision 2036. Naturally, in this speech, I provide a brief overview of the performance of NDP 11. The 2022 budget speech also marks 2 consecutive years under which economic management has been under a cloud of uncertainty caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. While this uncertainty will continue into the next financial year, we need to reflect through this speech as to how, as a country, we can continue to build resilience with our economic policies and strategies. Mr. Speaker, yet another significant highlight of the 2022 budget speech is its presenter. Presenting this budget as the first female Minister of Finance and Economic Development for Botswana, after 5 decades of independence, is significant in many respects. As a country, it reflects the difficult path in our societal development values, expressed at times subconsciously, that we have had to transcend in order to attain equality as expressed in the country. I believe that there have been equally competent and deserving female compatriots, and there are many more who can do this job. As for me personally, I wish to thank His Excellency the President for the opportunity to serve in this office as part of my long public service career. Most importantly, I hope that this appointment will encourage appointing authorities across a broad spectrum to believe in the leadership qualities of women, especially in the political space, but also inspire young girls and women to have faith in themselves. At the same time, I must appreciate and thank the 9 gentlemen who came before me in this position for the standards they set and the achievements they facilitated. Mr. Speaker, the process of formulating the 2022 budget followed a well-established tradition of consultation within and outside government, the latter through a series of dialogues with various stakeholders, popularly known as Budget Piso. These consultations are part of our efforts to promote openness and inclusivity in the formulation of the national budget. One of the key messages coming out of the various consultations with stakeholders was that we needed to refocus public spending on national priorities and needs. Traditionally, a large proportion of government spending goes to the recurrent budget, mainly to cover wages and salaries, grants and subventions to local authorities and state-owned enterprises. Many stakeholders were of the view that this must change, with more budget allocated to development projects and maintenance of social and economic infrastructure. The ministry has listened carefully and is prepared to make that expenditure switch with a view to achieving a reasonable balance between the recurrent and development budgets. In this regard, I am proposing in this budget to allocate more money to completion of ongoing development projects and maintenance of existing assets. While it would be difficult to change the pattern of spending dramatically in a short period of time, this is a movement in the right direction. I believe that this demonstrates our commitment as government to reorient public spending in line with national needs. Another consistent message from stakeholders was the need to continue to save Botswana from the COVID-19 pandemic. Stakeholders acknowledged government's response to date and agreed with the prioritization of COVID-19 for funding in the next financial year. Accordingly, one of the largest ministerial total budget allocation of over 10 billion pula is being proposed for the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Mr. Speaker, let me highlight some of the key initiatives contained in this budget, which I believe respond constructively to the needs of Botswana. First, as I mentioned, we will be focusing on the maintenance of public infrastructure, with a proposed total budget of 3 billion pula in the coming financial year. Furthermore, we will be reserving the bulk of maintenance projects for citizen-owned companies registered with PPADB. Second, the budget for constituency community projects will be reserved for contractors in the immediate locality in order to provide a focused fiscal stimulus throughout the entire country. Third, despite the fiscal constraints, we have ensured that the budget allocation for social welfare programs has been maintained or increased to protect the most vulnerable members of our population. Fourth, we are providing funding for the development of sporting talent through a new program with a budget of 24 million pula. Fifth, additional resources have been allocated to support the digital transition. Finally, the 2022-23 budget allows for a deficit, illustrating our commitment to providing a sustainable fiscal stimulus to support the economy and its transformation. However, I must make it clear that with this adequate budget provision for the 2022-23 financial year, the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development will not be inclined to accept any supplementary budget requests during the year. Mr. Speaker, before I get into the detail of my speech, I must remind the nation that COVID-19 remains with us and continues to pose challenges for us to deal with personally, socially, and economically. Although we had initially anticipated that 2021 would be a year of recovery, the COVID-19 virus continued to spread, especially during the months of June to August 2021, with the country recording a high number of deaths. In this regard, I wish to extend sincere condolences to all family members and friends who have lost loved ones to this virus since the start of the pandemic. Let me also recognize and extend my deepest gratitude to the frontline health workers who have borne a disproportionate burden in the fight against the pandemic. Thanks also to the business community at large for their various donations, which went a long way in the fight against COVID-19. I must also thank our development partners who have continued to support the country in these difficult times, as well as the staff of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development for their continued focus on the management of the economy despite the challenges posed by COVID-19 and measures to respond to it. Finally, I must appreciate the exemplary commitment shown by Botswana in terms of following COVID-19 protocols and coming forward in large numbers to be vaccinated. I move on to overview of National Development Plan 11. Mr. Speaker, the year 2022-23 will mark the final year of NDP 11, and it is therefore opportune to provide a quick overview of economic developments during NDP 11 to date. The first half of NDP 11 was, by current standards, business as usual. As was noted in the midterm review of NDP 11, GDP growth in the first half of the plan period was reasonably robust, averaging 4% a year in line with projections. However, this was not sufficient to create enough employment opportunities for the growing labor force. Consequently, unemployment rose from 17.5% in 2015-2016 to 23.2% in the first quarter of 2020, which marked the end of the first half of NDP 11. The fiscal balance during these first 3 years of NDP 11 was marginally worse than projected, with a cumulative deficit outturn of 22.3 billion as compared to the projected deficit of 18.4 billion over this period. Mr. Speaker, the second half of NDP 11 has been quite different and was dominated by the economic impact of COVID-19. This had a dramatic impact on GDP growth, despite a range of measures implemented by government through the short-term economic stabilization package in the first half of 2020 and the Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan, ERTP. Economic growth in 2020 was minus 8.5%, while robust recovery of 9.7% growth is being estimated for 2021. Over the 2 years, therefore, overall growth was approximately zero. Unemployment rose to 26% in the fourth quarter of 2021, up from 22.2% in the fourth quarter of 2019 before the pandemic. COVID-19 had a huge fiscal impact, resulting in large budget deficits. These are now forecast to total 26.6 billion for 2020 and 2021. Mr. Speaker, inevitably, this had to be funded by a combination of drawdowns from the accumulated savings in the government investment account and additional borrowing from domestic and external sources. Mr. Speaker, given the impact of COVID-19 on public finances, on top of longer-term structural trends, it was not unexpected that the country's sovereign credit rating was downgraded one notch by both Moody's and Standard & Poor's rating agencies during NDP 11. Nevertheless, both agencies have still given Botswana investment grade ratings, the only country in mainland sub-Saharan Africa to have such a rating. Furthermore, both agencies have a stable outlook for Botswana's rating. This outcome reflects our history of prudent management of public finances and the fact that our debt remains very low by regional and international standards. Mr. Speaker, another problem that we had to contend with during NDP 11 was the grey listing of Botswana by the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, following the mutual evaluation of 2017. This was followed by the blacklisting by the European Union. The evaluation had identified a number of deficiencies in Botswana's legal and operational framework with regard to anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism, proliferation financing, and a slow response to dealing with these deficiencies. We had to work very hard to address these issues, but eventually the necessary laws, amendments, and reforms were implemented, and the FATF grey listing was lifted in October 2021. I'm also pleased to report that the European Commission has determined that Botswana will be removed from the EU blacklist of high-risk third countries with regard to AML-CFT. This painful experience shows the importance of acting preemptively to conform with the constantly evolving international landscape of laws and regulations relating to AML and CFT and proliferation financing. Hence, the raft of legislation that honourable members have had to consider in recent days, including the overhaul of the Financial Intelligence Act, a new virtual assets law, and consequential amendments to 13 other laws. Mr. Speaker, it is important to recognize that our economy needs deep structural reforms to achieve growth and transformation. The structural reforms needed to increase the growth rate, boost job creation, improve productivity and reduce poverty and inequality were prioritized for the second half of NDP 11 and beyond. The reform agenda has to some extent been disrupted by COVID-19, but the need to implement these structural reforms remains critical. Our economy continues to have a narrow export base, which must be diversified and expanded. We have an external imbalance with more imports than exports, resulting in persistent balance of payments deficits. Our fiscal revenue base remains concentrated on external sources from minerals and SACU, with inadequate domestic revenue mobilization and high levels of spending and structural budget deficits. As a result, our economy has twin deficits that are of great concern and which are not sustainable. In addition, there is still weak implementation of programs and projects. It is therefore critical to strengthen accountability within government for the implementation of agreed policies. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the mixed performance of NDP 11, due in part to continued lack of structural reforms, but also to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in the second half of NDP 11, Vision 2036 remains the North Star guiding the country. At the end of the coming financial year 2022-2023, the country will be left with exactly 13 years or 2 NDPs to achieve the nation's aspirations espoused in Vision 2036, especially the transition from upper middle income to high income status. Achieving the goals and aspirations of the nation by 2036 amid the recent development challenges will require bold decisions accompanied by serious consequences for non-implementation of programs, policies, strategies, and projects without valid reasons. Moving on to national priorities and strategic objectives for 2022-2023. Mr. Speaker, the overarching set of national priorities and strategic objectives was laid out in the midterm review of NDP 11 and the accompanying economic recovery and transformation plan. The set of priorities agreed in the midterm review and ERTP have been complemented by the reset agenda priorities as pronounced by His Excellency the President of the Republic of Botswana, which reflects the need to adjust some of priorities in light of new and unexpected challenges. New approaches mean finding new and smarter ways of implementing programs and projects in a timely manner and within approved budgets. In particular, national priorities have shifted towards saving the population from the impact of COVID-19, alongside the priorities already agreed. I wish to highlight some of the actions that have been taken in pursuit of implementing the key strategic priorities, saving Botswana's population from COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, the pandemic has been with us for almost 2 years now, and the fight against COVID-19 remains the responsibility of each and every citizen and resident, as well as sectors of the economy. Government's objective is to continue providing targeted initiatives through implementation of life-saving programs in the public health sector. In light of the above, our COVID-19 vaccination program commenced on the 26th of March 2021 in order to reduce severe illnesses, hospitalizations, and deaths resulting from COVID-19 infections. The National Deployment and Vaccination Plan was developed with the aim of attaining at least 80% vaccination coverage of the eligible population, that is everyone at the age of 18 and above, by March 2022. We are well on track to achieve this target and indeed have already achieved it with regard to first dose vaccinations. This gives Botswana one of the highest vaccination rates in sub-Saharan Africa. It is expected that the national uptake will rise as vaccination for those aged 12 to 18 intensifies. The rollout of booster jabs has also commenced, Mr. Speaker. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, the largest share of the total ministerial recurrent budget will be proposed for the Ministry of Health and Wellness for their operating expenditure to contain the scourge, among other expenses. This includes 2 billion pula specifically for COVID-19, including rolling out vaccines for younger people, booster shots for those already vaccinated, and other related expenditures. Mr. Speaker, our efforts to combat COVID-19 also include the establishment of a vaccine manufacturing plant. This will not just produce advanced COVID-19 vaccines, but also vaccines to address other diseases. This will not only enhance our ability to deal with COVID-19, but also across many areas, including electricity, water and sanitation, ICT, agriculture, and land. Mr. Speaker, procurement for the solar PV, coal and CBM projects has already started, and Botswana Power Corporation has signed 3 power purchase agreements with independent power producers. 2 of these are for grid-tied solar PV plants in Shakawe and Bubono, and 1 is for a 10-megawatt CBM facility at Kodibele. Construction at the 2 solar PV sites is scheduled to commence in February 2022, while commercial operation is anticipated to start in July 2022. Procurement of 5 more solar PV projects has been successfully completed, and BPC is about to sign PPAs for the first utility-scale grid-connected 50-megawatt solar PV plant at Silibe Pikwe, and 4 more small-scale grid-tied solar PV plants for Molepolole, Lobatse, Maung, and Khanti. Mr. Speaker, regarding other solar PV projects, BPC is re-tendering for a 50-megawatt solar PV project for Jwaneng and 6 small-scale grid-tied solar PV plants for Totome, Kasane, Soroe, Tsabong, Charles Hill, as no suitable investors were identified for these sites from the original tender process. The 8 IPP projects, for which 3 agreements have already been signed and 5 are being concluded, reflect the progress with public-private partnerships in the energy sector, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the provision of water resources and sanitation services is a critical underpinning of economic growth and living standards. Government continues to provide significant resources for water and sanitation projects to address water shortages and sanitation challenges. Several major projects are ongoing, including the Maung Water and Sanitation Upgrade, the Gaborone-Lobatse Water Pipeline, and the Kanye Sanitation Project. As will be clear from the ministerial budget allocations, government continues to give priority and invest in water and sanitation infrastructure and services across the country. While we invest in new infrastructure, it is also critical to ensure that existing infrastructure is maintained so that scarce and costly water is not wasted through leakages. Mr. Speaker, government recognizes that access to serviced land plays a critical role in development in terms of land for both commercial and residential purposes. Significant resources are being devoted to land servicing projects across the country. Currently, there are 13 ongoing land servicing projects at various stages of implementation, which will go some way to addressing the backlog in the availability of serviced land. The allocation of these service plots will reflect priority needs for commercial purposes and genuine residential needs. To expedite land allocation in the face of constraints on the availability of service land, and service plots will be allocated to Botswana in the coming financial year. A number of initiatives, Mr. Speaker, are being fast-tracked for digital transition under the auspices of the Smart Boss project, the objective of which is to accelerate the transition away from a resource-based economy to a knowledge-based economy. There are 4 flagship projects: accelerated digital connectivity nationwide, moving government services online, leveraging smart technologies to address food security, and transforming the education sector. The first project is currently targeting village connectivity through the provision of high-speed infrastructure to government facilities, that is schools, hotlers, health facilities, and colleges. The project is on track to connect facilities in 142 villages by the end of March 2022. The second project is a target of at least 25 government services online by June 2022 and all services online by 2023-2024. The third is focusing on Lubu small stock farm digital transformation to produce meat products, dairy, and leather, as well as improving breeding stock. Mr. Speaker, The development of the agricultural sector is central to our economic development efforts to create employment and incomes and build resilience. The ERTP provides for investment in agricultural infrastructure, mainly through productive clusters, where farmers in selected localities can benefit from power, roads, storage, and marketing facilities. The Lobatse, Tuli Block, and Banda Matenga Special Economic Zones will anchor the creation of major export-oriented agro-industrial products through backward and forward linkages. Linkages of these food production zones with the Francistown SEZ as an envisaged multimodal logistics platform will help to promote opportunities for investment in the various SEZs and access to export markets. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the Silibe Pico Citrus project, with an investment value of 500 million pula, continues to be a flagship project in the Spedu region. The project is currently employing 228 workers, with a potential to create 1,000 jobs when fully operational. To date, a total of 222,400 citrus fruit trees have been planted on 310 hectares. The 800 hectares phase 1 is expected to be completed by June 2022. The project occupies 1,500 hectares land of Mannaesi Farm, which belongs to Madinari Multipurpose Cooperative Society. 70% of production is targeted for export. Mr. Speaker, significant ongoing investment is taking place in our roads infrastructure. The Kazungula Bridge was opened during the year and provides a critical link in the subcontinent's north-south transport infrastructure. I will highlight some of the other major road projects that will be undertaken in the coming year as I detail the proposed budget allocations. Social programs. Mr. Speaker, government recognizes the importance of social programs in supporting living standards of those who are unable to support themselves for reasons of age or infirmity, as well as programs focused on supporting livelihoods and income generation. The first grouping includes old age pensions, destitutes allowances, World War II veterans allowances, and the disabled. I am pleased to announce that the amounts of all these allowances will be increased with effect from 1st April 2022. The second group of programs includes Ipelecheng, ISPAD, and Limit, amongst others, which are being restructured to achieve greater effectiveness and reduce dependency on government. Mr. Speaker, government continues to implement the National Social Protection Framework as well as the National Social Protection COVID-19 Recovery Plan, all aimed at delivering a social protection system that is not fragmented and has strong administrative systems to reduce waste and double dipping and to improve the targeting of social welfare programs on the most needy. Development of the single social registry is progressing well, and social protection programs implemented by the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development have already been uploaded, while those implemented by other ministries will be uploaded by March 2022. With all these initiatives in place, government will have a social protection system that can effectively and efficiently respond to the varied risks and vulnerabilities faced by persons of different age groupings and social background. Service delivery reforms. Mr. Speaker, I have already mentioned that there's a pressing need to implement structural reforms in the economy and the public sector. Let me take this opportunity to outline some of the initiatives that will be implemented during the course of the coming financial year. Mr. Speaker, one of the consequences of the pandemic was to delay the population and housing census, which was originally scheduled for August 2021. For reasons that are well known, the census did not take place last year, but is now scheduled for March 2022. The results of the census, which we anticipate will be available very quickly due to the use of electronic means of data collection and analysis, will inform the deliberations of the Limitation Commission that will start in mid-2022 and report prior to the next national elections. More broadly, the census will provide information that will be used to guide the provision of public services and infrastructure, so as to ensure that changes in population distribution and settlement size are taken into consideration. Mr. Speaker, it has been recognized for some time that the current structure of government ministries is not optimal. Proposals for a restructuring of ministries have been approved by Cabinet for implementation from the 1st of April 2022. The intention is to rationalize the structure and align to national priorities and the reset agenda. I should note, however, that the number of ministries will not increase and no additional expenditures will be incurred. Hence, some reallocation of budgets will be required as per the new ministerial structure. Mr. Speaker, previous budget speeches have made reference to the development of a strategy to rationalize state-owned enterprises, or SOEs, under a special cabinet subcommittee. I am pleased to inform this Honourable House that the Cabinet Subcommittee has concluded its work and submitted its recommendations. Government is actively considering the subcommittee's proposals to rationalize the number of state-owned enterprises by merging, closing, and/or divesting of government stakes in some state-owned enterprises. I am confident that this will result in greater efficiency in the SOE sector, reduced budgetary subventions, and a reduction in the scope of government activity in favor of increased space for the private sector. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, government has taken a decision to establish the Botswana National Public Health Institute, BNPHI, despite the moratorium on the creation of new state-owned enterprises, as part of the long-term strategy to deal with future public health pandemics such as COVID-19. The Institute will provide national leadership and expertise in driving the public health function nationwide, while linking the country to the global health community in the prevention and control of diseases and epidemics. Mr. Speaker, as honourable members are aware, this Parliament has handled an extensive legislative program despite the constraints imposed by COVID-19. It is anticipated that this pace of legislative reform will be maintained throughout the coming financial year. I should emphasize, however, that the legislative review is needed to keep pace with domestic and global developments and ensure that our laws are fit for purpose to deal with current and emerging challenges, as well as supporting our reset and transformation agenda. I am grateful to honourable members for having supported the legislative agenda that I have put before you over the past year, but note that many of these bills and acts have been critical. The Credit Information Act aims to improve the efficiency of our credit system and ensure the protection of borrowers, while the Public Procurement Act will serve to modernize public procurement and make it more efficient and attuned to development objectives. The amended Motor Vehicle Accident Fund, Collective Investment Undertakings, and Securities Acts have introduced important changes to modernize the earlier legislation. Mr. Speaker, Parliament has recently passed the revamped Financial Intelligence Bill, the Movable Assets Security Interest Bill, and the Virtual Assets Bill. Other key legal reforms still to be presented include amendments to the Retirement Funds Act, the Bank of Botswana and Banking Acts, the NBFIRA Act, and the Public Finance Management Act. The review of the PFM Act of 2011 is expected to modernize it to accommodate new changes brought about by reform, and as such requires to be expedited. The review is further anticipated to embed and engender a culture of absolute discipline and recultivate accountability. I believe that these legal reforms will help to transform our financial sector, improve financial inclusion, and strengthen our public finances, and thereby support broader economic transformation. Mr. Speaker, as I have mentioned, there are weaknesses in policy and project implementation that have held us back and which need to be urgently addressed. Several key challenges can therefore be expected in the coming year. First, the Government Implementation and Coordination Office, GAICO, will introduce the development manager approach to project delivery, a concept where major public projects are packaged and their implementation outsourced to private companies. Smaller projects will be selected for implementation on a turnkey basis, where a contractor is appointed to handle the entirety of design, management, and construction and is paid on handover to government. Second, the management and maintenance of selected government-owned buildings will be outsourced to the private sector through facilities management contracts. These initiatives, Mr. Speaker, will facilitate a quantum shift in the implementation of public sector projects. Mr. Speaker, I must, however, mention that for these initiatives to be successful, we must address the elephant in the room. We will fail to improve service delivery unless we confront the problem of corruption, which has been spreading like a cancer in our society, both in the public sector and outside of it. Some past decisions may have had unintended consequences of engendering corruption, despite being made in good faith, such as allowing public officers to venture into business while still in government employment. Not only does this encourage corruption, but it also undermines productivity. It is essential that we root out corruption and punish harshly those who are guilty, whether in the public sector or in the private sector, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on a more positive note, government continues to make progress with utilizing Triple P's model for financing and implementation of projects. Contracts have been signed or are about to be signed for 8 power generation projects that will be implemented during 2022 using a Triple P model involving independent power producers. Several other potential projects have been identified, of which the reclamation and treatment of Gaborone wastewater for potable use is the most advanced. In addition, some major road projects will be implemented as Triple Ps, including the Sihidwa-Shakawe and Francistown roads. This may also involve the tolling of some sections of the A1 road. Major cross-border railway projects to South Africa and Zambia are also being structured for implementation on a Triple P basis. Triple Ps will be used for the construction of student accommodation and teachers' housing. Further, my ministry will issue guidelines to local authorities to enable them to implement projects on a public-private partnership basis. Mr. Speaker, while progress may appear to be slow with the implementation of Triple Ps, it is essential for government to fully evaluate the fiscal commitments and risks that may be entailed in long-term Triple P contracts. It is important to bear in mind that many Triple Ps still involve costs to the budgets, but these are long-term recurrent costs rather than immediate capital costs. Triple P contracts must be structured to ensure that risks are appropriately shared with the private sector partner and are not all taken by government. Government is also pursuing the decentralization agenda, involving the decentralization of key public services to local authorities. This is expected to enhance ownership and accountability within local authorities, as well as bring services closer to the people. In addition to decentralizing public service to local authorities, certain functions carried out by central government ministries will be moved to implementing ministries and departments. This includes devolving some powers to accounting officers, as it is expected to enhance their ability to make rapid decisions and in turn improving their effectiveness and accountability. To create a conducive environment for this reform, government will review existing policies, rules, systems, and processes to remove any barriers during the 2022-2023 financial year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in line with the National Payment System Vision and Strategy of 2020 to 2024, and the shift towards the use of electronic fund transfers and point-of-sale transactions, the use of checks in Botswana will be discontinued effective 1st January 2024. In order to ensure that this change is implemented seamlessly, the Bank of Botswana, in collaboration with the Bankers Association of Botswana, will implement a program for consultations with stakeholders and the issuance of public notifications. Now, Mr. Speaker, I move on to the macroeconomic and fiscal basis for the 2022-2023 budget. Mr. Speaker, the formulation of the annual budget is on the basis of a particular macroeconomic environment, both domestic and international. The recent economic environment has, of course, been extremely challenging. Nevertheless, even though the COVID-19 pandemic is still with us, there are signs of optimism, both globally and domestically. While the global economy contracted by 3.1% in 2020, it is estimated to have rebounded to 5.9% growth in 2021, before moderating to 4.4% in 2022, according to the latest IMF World Economic Outlook of January 2022. Global economic recovery is being driven by the continued vaccine rollout, as well as normalization of economic activity as restrictions are rolled back and travel resumes. However, the pattern of economic recovery may be uneven as new waves of COVID-19 infections emerge. Global recovery is also being held back by delays in the recovery of international trade, with shipping delays and rising costs. Mr. Speaker, the outlook for the domestic economy is positive, with a growth rate of 9.7% projected for 2021 and 4.3% in 2022. Our successful vaccination program will help to underpin this growth. Nevertheless, there are considerable risks to economic growth projections, given that the pandemic remains unpredictable, as we have seen recently with the emergence of new COVID variants. Such developments will have an impact on the speed at which the domestic economy can recover, especially the recovery in international trade, travel, and tourism. Mr. Speaker, economic recovery has unfortunately been accompanied by rising inflation, which reached 8.7% in December 2021. This is the highest inflation rate in a decade and is mainly driven by higher global fuel prices and administered prices. Global economic recovery from the COVID-19 recession in 2020 has caused demand for many goods and services to rise sharply in 2021, pushing up commodity prices and freight costs. As a result, most countries are experiencing higher inflation. The good news is that this is expected to be a short-term phenomenon, and inflation should normalize during 2022. Despite the increase in annual inflation, the Bank of Botswana maintained the bank rate at 3.75%, reaffirming a monetary policy stance that supports economic recovery. The bank forecasts that domestic inflation will fall throughout 2022 and return to the 3 to 6% objective range in the medium term. With respect to the country's external account, or the balance of payments, a deficit of 20.1 billion or 11.6% of GDP was recorded in 2020, compared to a deficit of 12 billion or 6.7% of GDP in 2019. During the first half of 2021, the balance of payments deficit has continued, but at the lower rate of 4.4% of GDP. The deficit in external accounts reflects net foreign exchange outflows associated with payments for imports, government's foreign currency payment obligations, and offshore investments by pension funds and other institutional investors in excess of revenues and inflows from exports, transfers, and foreign investment. Despite the balance of payment deficits up to the middle of the year, the foreign exchange reserves experienced a modest recovery to 60 billion pula in October 2021, an increase of 4.3% from 57.5 billion in October 2020. The government investment account portion of the reserves was 9.9 billion as at October 2021, compared to 6.5 billion in October 2020, representing a 52% increase over the year, Mr. Speaker. Much of the increase in the reserves in the government investment account reflected the drawdown of a budget support loan in October 2021. The level of foreign exchange reserves in October 2021 was equivalent to 11.3 months of imports of non-diamonds goods and services. 2020-21 budget outturn, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, now turning to our fiscal position in 2020-2021, total revenues and grants stood at 49.37 billion, representing an increase of 2.15% from the revised budget of 48.33 billion. On the other hand, the total expenditure and net lending amounted to 65.79 billion, or 5.1% lower than the revised budget estimate of 69.36 billion. Recurrent expenditure was 1.57 billion lower than the revised budget, indicating the effectiveness of the cash saving and cost containment measures put in place by government towards the end of 2020, while development expenditure showed an underspending of 2 billion bull. Overall, the deficit for the 2020-2021 financial year was 16.41 billion, or 9.4% of GDP. 2021-2022 revised budget estimates. Mr. Speaker, the estimated total revenues and grants for 2021-2022 are projected to decrease by 1.18 billion from 64 billion to 63.4 billion in the revised budget. Total expenditure and net lending, on the other hand, has been revised upwards to 73.57 billion, reflecting a projected deficit of 10.16 billion, or 5.09% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, government has over the years provided significant budget allocation for development programs and projects to stimulate the economy. However, the allocated funding has not always been fully utilized. Between 2016 and 17 and 2020-21, average development budget expenditure was 88% of allocated amounts. In the current financial year, as at 31 December 2021, development expenditure stood at 58.7% of the budgeted total, with 3 months left to the end of the financial year. Hence, implementing ministries need to significantly increase the pace of project implementation to ensure that the funding that has been provided for development projects and initiatives is used as intended and used cost effectively. Measures to restore fiscal sustainability. Mr. Speaker, before I present the budget proposals for the 2022-2023 financial year, it is important to be reminded that our fiscal position has deteriorated in recent years, with substantial budget deficits. These are partly related to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also reflect long-term structural trends and weaknesses that need to be addressed. The long-term trends show a progressive decline in fiscal revenues relative to the size of the economy, largely reflecting lower mineral revenues as the diamond industry has matured and the cost of mining have increased, combined with the volatility of revenues from the Southern Customs Union SACU, as known. These two sources have historically accounted for almost 2/3 of total revenues, and domestic revenue generation from taxes, fees and charges has been relatively low, Mr. Speaker. The result of the lower mineral revenues has been a structural change in the budget. Historically, budget deficits were infrequent and would be balanced by subsequent surpluses. Now, budget deficits are persistent and structural, a situation that would eventually lead to an unsustainable level of public debt. This cannot be sustained and requires that both domestic revenue mobilization and expenditure levels are addressed. Hence, a variety of measures will be implemented to restore fiscal balance and underpin long-term fiscal stability. Revenue mobilization. Mr. Speaker, the first challenge is to broaden the domestic revenue base by extending the tax net and improving the efficiency of revenue collection. Implementation of these measures gained momentum in the 2021-2022 financial year and include revision of user fees and service charges across government. These will continue to be implemented in the 2022-2023 financial year. Attention will also be paid to ensuring that those who should pay taxes do so. Planned activities include a review of taxation laws to enhance efficiency and collection, use of ICT to improve collection efficiency, increase tax audits and inspections, as well as enhance public education for taxpayers to achieve better compliance. Managing fiscal expenditure. Mr. Speaker, the expenditure budget will always face demands that are greater than the available fiscal resources. Public spending is essential for stimulating the economy, providing public services, and financing investment that will provide public goods to support future growth and efficiency. The challenge is not just to manage the overall level of spending, but to ensure that spending is focused on productive and prioritized activities, and that spending on programs and projects is carried out efficiently. Waste must be reduced. Much more attention to achieving value for money and accountability must be strengthened. With respect to the recurrent budget, there's a pressing need to reduce spending so that more resources can be provided to the development budget for the financing of development projects. In this regard, the following measures will be put in place this coming financial year. Reduce and effectively manage the government wage bill. This will be implemented through the workforce planning system, which is being developed by the Directorate of Public Service Management, DPSM, through the Botswana Public Service Workforce Strategy and Workforce Plans. This project started in July 2021. The key objectives of this project are to manage the government wage bill, to promote workforce flexibility, and improve productivity in the public sector. It will help to identify where public sector employment can be restructured and hence identify possible savings in the wage and salary bill. This will directly address the problem of the ever-growing wage bill, which was estimated at over 16% of GDP in 2020-21, compared to the acceptable 10% recorded by comparator nations. The benefits of this initiative will start to be realized in the coming financial year. However, Mr. Speaker, since the DPSM is taking a long-term approach to this initiative, and given the transitions required, the project is envisaged to run over a period of 3 years for effective implementation. Reducing subventions to commercial SOEs. In addition to the ongoing process of rationalization and restructuring of state-owned enterprises, we will reduce the size of subventions to commercial SOEs. The approved subventions to SOEs from the recurrent budget for the current 2021-2022 financial year amounts to 4.8 billion or 2.05% of projected GDP. The proposed provision for the next financial year is marginally lower at 1.85% of GDP. Subventions will further be reduced in the coming years through a combination of requiring commercial SOEs to cover their own costs, improved efficiencies across the OE sector, and SOE rationalization. Reducing revenue support grants to local authorities. Mr. Speaker, total provision for local authorities amounts to 4.34 billion or 8.5% of the approved ministerial recurrent budget for the current financial year, and is 4.17 billion or 7.81% of the proposed budget for the next financial year. Gradually, the revenue support grant will be reduced, particularly to urban councils, to incentivize them to generate their own revenues and to fund their programs. Cost containment. Mr. Speaker, various initiatives have already been introduced to contain costs, and a further set of measures will be introduced in the coming financial year. This will target expenditure that can be reduced without compromising on service delivery and requiring the beneficiaries of some public services to share in the cost of provision where they can afford to do so. Particular attention is being paid to the amount of money spent on scarce skills allowance in the public service, much of which may no longer be justified in terms of the need to recruit and retain employees. Similarly, the amount spent on overtime allowances appears to be excessive and will be cut back. Government also spends large amounts on tuition fees and maintenance allowances for students in tertiary education. This is an area of possible cost sharing with parents where they have the ability to pay. In line with the practice and commitments of the BDP government, extensive consultations will take place before any major changes are introduced. Mr. Speaker, we are aware that the rapid scaling up of spending needed to fight the pandemic may have led to some efficiencies in procurement. In this regard, the Office of the Auditor General subsequently undertook an audit of COVID-19 related procurement. The report has been tabled and its recommendations are being acted upon. It is also worth noting that while some problems were identified, we were in a situation where there were global shortages of critical supplies and extraordinary measures had to be taken to protect Botswana from the scourge of COVID-19. Improved preparation and prioritization of development projects. Mr. Speaker, with regard to the development budget, we are aware of weaknesses in project implementation that have contributed to inefficiencies in expenditure. This reflects challenges such as slow implementation and under expenditure against budgets, cost overruns, and a lack of project prioritization. To address these issues, the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development is in the process of strengthening the process for project preparation, prioritization, and value for money assessment for development projects that will be proposed for inclusion in the National Development Plan 12. The new process entails implementation of a three-phase appraisal process. 1, confirmation of concept. 2, pre-feasibility study, and 3, full feasibility study. At each stage, only projects that meet the required selection criteria will proceed to the next stage, and hence weaker projects and those that are not ready for implementation will be weeded out. In addition, there will be more rigorous and detailed audits of development projects to address waste and corruption. Mr. Speaker, there have been references to the statement made in last year's budget speech regarding inefficiency of 37% in our development budget. I wish to clarify several aspects of this. First, this figure comes from a study carried out by the IMF in 2017 in the form of a public investment management assessment for Botswana, following similar exercises in other countries. Second, the figure refers to the efficiency gap in the implementation of the investment spending part of the development budget. The result essentially means that, considering the actual stock of social and economic public infrastructure, public investment spending to date could have resulted in 37% more infrastructure in the country if it had been spent in line with the most efficient systems in the world, compared with an average efficiency gap of 27% across the world. There are many reasons for this efficiency gap, including poor project appraisal and selection, spending money on projects that generate low returns and not prioritizing high return projects, as well as poor project management and implementation. As I have mentioned earlier, measures are being put in place to address this efficiency gap, including stronger accountability mechanisms, better project management, and a comprehensive three-stage appraisal prioritization and selection process for projects being considered for inclusion in the public investment program. Rebuilding fiscal buffers. Mr. Speaker, the primary task with regard to fiscal sustainability is to improve revenue collection and contain expenditure so as to prevent the emergence of growing and unsustainable fiscal deficits. Ideally, however, we should return to a position of budget surpluses in order to rebuild fiscal buffers. The Government Investment Account, or GIA, is a critical financial buffer that is needed to smooth out cash flow fluctuations, given that government revenues are susceptible to economic shocks and hence are volatile. The GIA's average monthly balance was approximately 4.5 billion during the first 6 months of the 2021-2022 financial year. This is a significant decline from earlier years, which is the result of the continuous drawdowns from the GIA over the past few financial years to finance budget deficits mainly. The objective is to restore the GIA to its pre-COVID-19 crisis levels to rebuild this fiscal buffer. This underscores the need to contain expenditures in order to manage the fiscal deficit, which is the main driver of the declining government investment account. (2022-2023) budget proposals. Mr. Speaker, I now present the budget proposals for the financial year 2022-2023. The budget proposals have largely been framed around the imperatives of economic recovery and transformation, while at the same time seeking to support and sustain livelihoods. The proposed allocations have also been formulated to provide a response to several challenges, including remnants of developmental issues that have seen the economy struggle to grow at rates required to make the necessary transition from an upper middle income to a high income country. Mr. Speaker, the 2022 budget strategy paper published in September 2021 showed how overall budgeted spending in the 2021-22 financial year was spread across 6 priority areas derived from the reset agenda and the ERTP. Applying the same categorization to the proposed 2022-23 budget, the shares of total spending allocated to the digital transition, infrastructure and saving Botswana have been increased compared to the previous year. While there has been a reduction in the share allocated to human capital development, this still remains the largest priority area in terms of funds allocated. There has also been a reduction in the share allocated to other spending, being the general running costs of government outside of the main priority areas. Total revenues and grants. Total revenues and grants for the 2022-2023 financial year is expected to amount to 67.87 billion. Of this amount, mineral revenue accounts for 24.08 billion or 35.5%. Non-mineral income tax is the second major source of revenue, projected at 14.26 billion or 21.0%. Customs and excise is expected to amount to 13.94 billion, while VAT is estimated to amount to 11.97 billion. Most revenue sources are projected to generate higher revenues in the coming financial year compared to the current financial year. The exception is customs and excise revenue, which is set to decrease by 405 million compared to the previous year due to the expected adjustment to SACCO receipts following previous overpayments. Total expenditure and net lending. Total expenditure and net lending is projected at 74.84 billion. Of this total, recurrent expenditure accounts for 58.51 billion, while development expenditure accounts for 16.43 billion and net lending of minus 95.5 million. Statutory expenditure. The proposed amount for statutory expenditure is 13.67 billion, which is an increase of 3.08 billion or 29.1% compared to the current financial year. The proposed allocation is meant to cater for normal public debt servicing obligations, government's pension contribution for civil servants to the Public Officers Pension Fund (BPOPF), and other statutory commitments, which include judges and other specified officers' personnel emoluments. Ministerial recurrent budget. Mr. Speaker, the total proposed allocation for ministerial recurrent expenditure stands at 53.36 billion, which is an overall growth of 2.71 billion or 5.3% over the current year's approved budget of 50.66 billion. The share of the proposed budget is as follows. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Health and Wellness exists to promote and provide comprehensive healthcare services to the nation, including key priority of saving Botswana from COVID-19 pandemic. It is for this reason that the ministry has been allocated the largest share of 18.7% of the proposed ministerial recurrent budget, amounting to 10.01 billion. This represents a significant growth of 2.11 billion or 26.7% over the current year's approved budget. Government's continued response to the pandemic will entail the procurement of more personal protective equipment, oxygen equipment, and vaccines, including booster vaccines, as well as logistics and ancillary supplies. The budget allocation also provides for medical aid cover to public service employees under the Botswana Public Officers Medical Aid Scheme, BPOMAS. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Basic Education will be allocated the second largest share of the proposed ministerial recurrent budget of 18.5%, amounting to 9.87 billion. The proposed allocations are intended to help drive the ministry's key mandate of striving to educate students to become self-sufficient, lifelong learners and empower them to be competent, productive, and responsible caring citizens. The above represents growth of 343.66 million or 3.6% over the current year's approved budget. The major cost drivers of the proposed budget includes teachers' salaries, which includes provision for new teacher positions to absorb 3,509 temporary teachers on a full-time basis, as well as allowances, operational costs for Botswana Examination Council, food and books for students, service charges, and other costs associated with learners, such as materials for practical subjects. Maintenance of existing facilities continues to be a priority under the ministry. Mr. Speaker, the third largest share of the proposed ministerial recurrent budget amounted to 8.53 billion or 16% goes to the Ministry of Defense, Justice and Security. The proposed budget entails an increase of 135.02 million or 1.6% over the 2021-22 approved budget. It includes budgetary provision for operational costs, mainly for Botswana Defence Force, Botswana Police Service, and prisons and rehabilitation services. The funding will be utilized to drive the following policy objectives: provide safety and protection to citizens, promote human rights and the rule of law, professional policing service in partnership with the community, provide legal advice, legal representation and public education on legal matters to the underprivileged and vulnerable sections of the population, provide safe custodial care and correction to offenders through effective rehabilitation and integration programs for social protection of our society. Mr. Speaker, the proposed budget for the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development, the People's Ministry, is 7.15 billion or 13.5%, representing the fourth largest share of the ministerial recurrent budget. The growth over the 2021-22 approved budget is 15.63 million or 0.2%. The proposed budgetary provision will cater for the promotion of effective local governance structures, implementation of strategies for sustainable livelihoods, as well as to ensure availability of resources for local authorities to meet their statutory responsibilities. The major budgetary provision amounted to 3.66 billion goes to the revenue support grants to district and urban councils, which accounts for 51.2% of the proposed ministerial recurrent budget. It will also cater for food supplies at primary schools, psychosocial support services to the general public in response to the effects of COVID-19 pandemic, mainly the rising number of gender-based violence cases against women and children, as well as payment of social benefits. In regard to the latter, 1.29 billion is provided for 4 social protection schemes whose allocations are being increased by between 15 and 38%. This includes the old age pension, which will be increased by 100 pula from 530 to 630 pula a month, and the destitution allowance, disability allowance, and World War II veterans allowance, all of which will be increased by 100 pula per month. VDC allowances will also be increased by 100 pula per month, by 100 pula. The increases signify government's commitment to care for and support the elderly and vulnerable segments of our population. Mr. Speaker, as noted in the 2021 budget speech, there is still insufficient attention with regards to maximizing the potential for revenue collection. This is evidenced especially by the accumulation of unacceptably high levels of property rate arrears for urban councils. The Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development is pursuing improved collection of rates income, and the performance of all local authorities will be monitored. Furthermore, district councils have been empowered to collect property rates, and they will be required to do so. In due course, the intention is that funding mechanisms for local authorities will be reformed to incentivize the generation of their own sources of revenues, which is consistent with the broader decentralization agenda. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Tertiary Education, Research, Science and Technology constitutes the fifth largest share of the proposed ministerial recurrent budget. The budget allocation for this ministry is 3.26 billion, which is a decline of 1.34 billion over the current year's approved budget. This is a result of the cabinet decision to transfer the tuition fees vote from the Department of Tertiary Education Financing, DTEF, to the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. The budget includes allowances for government-sponsored tertiary students and other related costs, which continue to be the main cost drivers of this ministry. The proposed budget also covers staff and operational costs for tertiary institutions and parastatals under the ministry. The 2022-23 proposed budget allocation drives the human capital development priority that emphasizes the need to provide and build knowledge and innovation through implementation of policy on tertiary education, research, science, and technology to transform Botswana into a more diversified, employment-intensive, knowledge-intensive, and competitive-based economy. Mr. Speaker, the proposed budget for the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development is 2.39 billion. The amount has grown by 1.4 billion pula over the current year's approved budget. The substantial increase is accounted for by the transfer of tuition fees vote as part of the measures undertaken to reform the tertiary education financing grant loan scheme. The transfer is aimed at ensuring that this vote is managed prudently for long-term sustainability, Mr. Speaker. Furthermore, the Ministry of Finance has contracted an accounting firm to undertake a special audit on the tertiary education financing activities for the last 10 financial years. The work entails an in-depth examination of management of the tertiary education financing, awarding of sponsorships, reasonability of tuition fee levels charged by tertiary institutions, allocation of students to tertiary institutions, and examinations of issues around payment of tuition fees and allowances, and the report will be submitted by July 2022. The proposed budget allocation also covers operational costs for the ministry, as well as grants, subventions, and transfers to parastatals and other organizations that fall under the ministry. Mr. Speaker, out of the total allocation for the ministerial recurrent expenditure for the financial year 2020-2023, the Ministry of Transport and Communications allocated 1.82 billion, or 3.4% of the total. The proposed budget shows a decline of 4.22 million, or 0.2%, from the 2021-2022 approved budget. The operational costs of the ministry are driven by the core mandate, mainly the development and utilization of information communication technologies, ICT, and integrated transport services. These include provision of timely, reliable, and smart transport and communication services anchored on world-class infrastructure platforms. The budget also covers subventions to Civil Aviation Authority of Botswana to cover the operational costs of the entity. The ministry also funds Botswana Post, which provides universal service obligations countrywide. Other major items include fuel for government vehicles, road maintenance, computer systems, consumables, and maintenance. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocation for the Ministry of Presidential Affairs, Governance, and Public Administration is 1.58 billion pula, a decline of 0.8% from the current year's approved budget. The budget allocation is intended to support the ministry's mandate, which is to safeguard and promote good governance, as well as to guide sustainable socio-economic growth and development for the benefit of all citizens of Botswana. The budget will mainly cover the ministry's core mandate, which is spread across its departments and parastatals. It also includes provision for the Botswana National Strategic Framework for HIV and AIDS 2019 to 2023. Mr. Speaker, a sizable allocation of the proposed ministerial recurrent budget goes to the Ministry of Agricultural Development and Food Security. The proposed allocation to this ministry is 1.44 billion, which is an increase of 51.3 million or 3.7% over the current year's approved budget. The proposed budget will support the agricultural sector in pursuit of improved domestic food production to achieve a higher degree of self-sufficiency in agricultural products. The proposed budget principally consists of subventions to Botswana University of Agriculture and Natural Resources, BUAN, and the National Agricultural Research and Development Institute, NADI. It will also cover the cost of foot and mouth disease vaccinations, operational costs for BMC Maung, and maintenance of existing facilities, including camps, plant and equipment, and computer systems, such as the Botswana Animal Information and Traceability System, or BATE. Mr. Speaker, the remainder of the total ministerial recurrent expenditure, that is 7.32 billion pula, is shared among the rest of the ministries and extra ministerial departments. Development budget. Mr. Speaker, the proposed development budget for 2022-2023 financial year is 16.43 billion pula, an increase of 1.76 billion or 12% over the 2021-22 budget. Priority was given to ongoing projects, refurbishment and maintenance of existing facilities, and strategic projects geared towards economic recovery and growth, as well as sustainable employment. The proposed development budget is aligned to the reset agenda as well as the ERTP. A total of 3.39 billion is proposed for the digital transition, 2.01 billion for saving Botswana's population from COVID-19, 664.24 million for value chain development. Further, 1.52 billion is proposed for human capital development, and 8.7 billion is to cover other development projects across the sectors. Mr. Speaker, out of the proposed 16.43 billion pula, a sum of 13.42 billion or 81.69% is for ongoing projects. 516.2 million or 3.1% is to cover projects at feasibility and design stage. 1.63 billion or 9.94% is for pre-contract stage projects, while 5.23% is for new and emerging projects. Despite the tight budgetary situation, budget allocations for social protection programs that fall under the development budget, such as Ipeleng, poverty eradication, self-help housing scheme, destitute housing, livestock management and infrastructure development, and constituency community projects have been maintained. The constituency community projects is area-specific and is meant to stimulate the local economy. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, enterprises in the locality will be prioritized in the award of contracts for constituency community projects. In that regard, all procurement should benefit people in the local area. Mr. Speaker, government has made commitments to improve supply and management of water in the country. To this end, the largest share of the proposed 2022-2023 development budget has been allocated to the Ministry of Land Management, Water and Sanitation Services at 5.06 billion or 30.83%. Water supply projects account for 4.02 billion or 79.44% of the ministry's budget allocation. Major water development and sanitation infrastructure projects include Maun Phase 2 Contract 3, construction of treatment plant and transmission pipeline, Maun Phase 2 Contract 4, wastewater treatment plants and connection of satellite villages, Mulepolelo Water Supply and Sanitation Scheme, design, tendering and construction, NSC 2.2, Palape Mamashia Water Pipeline, and continuation of the ongoing projects, including the construction of Mount Water Scheme, NSC connection to Molepolole, Kopong, Tebe Paswa, and other neighboring villages, NSC 2.2, Palape Mamashia Water Pipeline, Lobase Water Master Plan implementation in Lobase and the Borolong area in the southern part of the country. Mr. Speaker, the other major development projects include the ongoing Moshopa Sanitation, North-South Career 2.3, Kasane Kazungula Waterworks, Chobe Zambezi Water Transfer Scheme, connection of Tsopon South villages to the North-South Career, the ongoing water treatment plant in Kasane, and the Northeast Totome Water Supply Project. The Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development has been allocated the second largest share of the proposed development budget at 2 billion pula, or 12.25%. This is for the continued implementation of social protection programs, procurement of tablets for primary schools, construction and maintenance of primary schools facilities backlog eradication project, development of reception classes, and village infrastructure projects, including the Mopane Block 8 Road, Loholo Road, and Tlokwanyan Mogodisani internal roads, and constituency community projects. With regard to the latter, priority will be given to the construction of internal roads, for which projects will be reserved for citizen contractors in the locality, including the youth. Mr. Speaker, in order to align with the implementation of the Economic Recovery Transformation Plan initiatives, the third largest share at 1.87 billion or 11.4% is allocated to the Ministry of Transport and Communications. This budget provision has been made for the continuation of the implementation of major roads projects, including Shashamoke Borolon Chadibe, Alamabele Musu, Mogodisana Havane Mankhodi Junction, and several projects included in the ERTP, notably the Makalama Bedimo Topi, Nata Maung, Matiti Bray Veda, Palape Martins Drift, and Nata Maung roads. As mentioned earlier, two major road projects, Francis Town Nata and Sihitomo Hembo, will be implemented as Triple P projects. In the meantime, there are extensive repairs taking place on the Sihitomo Hembo road to address pressing needs. Other road infrastructure projects include the ongoing traffic control, modernization, and centralized traffic control for the Greater Gaborone area. The budget also caters for feasibility studies for the Mosetseka Zungula, Mamabulale Palale, and Trans-Kalahari railway lines. Part of the budget will go into information and communications technology projects, such as the government data network and data center upgrading, the national backbone network, and local access networks. Mr. Speaker, as part of the ERTP, the A1 road from Ramatlabam to Ramokhweban will be progressively reconstructed and converted to dual carriageway. The project will be implemented in phases, with the first phase covering road sections that have reached the design life and are currently experiencing failure due to development of potholes. These include 134 kilometers from Palape to Tonota, 42 kilometers from Atishia to Rasesa, and 46 kilometers from Boatle to Lobatse. Funds have been availed for relocation of services, land acquisition, and impact assessment studies for these roads that I mentioned, Mr. Speaker. The Ministry of Defense, Justice and Security takes the fourth largest allocation at 1.68 billion, or 10.21%, for provision of infrastructure, vehicles and defense and communication equipment for Botswana Defense Force, Botswana Police Service, and the Department of Prisons and Rehabilitation Services. Mr. Speaker, the fifth largest share of the proposed development budget of 997.22 million, or 6%, goes to the Ministry of Presidential Affairs, Governance, and Public Administration for provision of infrastructure required for, among others, the entertainment industry, the Orapa House Technology Park, and ICT projects undertaken by Smart Boss. The funds also cater for poverty eradication and HIV/AIDS programs. The Ministry of Agricultural Development and Food Security takes the sixth largest share of the proposed development budget at 959 million, or 5.84%. The proposed budget caters for the revamped integrated support program for arable agriculture development ISPAD, which has been redesigned to be a more efficient and sustainable program. The budget will also continue to support projects such as small stock, piggeries, poultry and dairy production, beekeeping, horticulture, and fish farming under the Livestock Management and Infrastructure Development 2 or limit program to facilitate value chains. The funds will also be used to provide essential services and basic infrastructure to selected agricultural production areas such as roads, telecommunications, electricity, and water reticulation in line with the ERTP. Mr. Speaker, the seventh largest share of the proposed development budget is proposed for the Ministry of Basic Education at 936.84 million, or 5.7%, to cater for school digitization initiatives in order to drive the transformation of Botswana into a knowledge-based economy. The funds will be used for procurement of devices for ICT-based learning for all learners and teachers from Standard 5 to Form 5. The rollout of functional connectivity to all schools, development and sourcing of e-content for schools, training of teachers and school managers on basic ICT skills, and use of technology on teaching and learning. In implementing school digitization initiatives, priority shall be given to capable and competitive local companies. Mr. Speaker, the remaining ministries and departments share the remaining balance of the proposed development budget of 2.69 billion, or 17.7%. The major projects are maintenance of infrastructure facilities, staff housing, housing schemes like self-help housing agency SHA, destitute housing for the low-income groups, and poverty alleviation scheme. The budget also caters for the completion of sports stadia in Moshopa and Madinare, community stadia in Tonota, Reikops, Zabonya and Kanye, as well as a feasibility study on the possible hosting of the 2027 African Cup of Nations AFCON football tournament in Botswana. Mr. Speaker, other projects under this budget are rural village electrification and network extension for 107 rural villages. The budget will also finance the Innovation Fund and Research Fund and research capacity and building, as well as e-services resuscitation or eGov, in order to support digitization for effective service delivery and business facilitation, overall balance and financing. The overall balance for the 2022-2023 financial year is a deficit projected to amount to 6.98 billion, or 3.2% of GDP. This budget deficit will be financed through a combination of issuance of domestic government securities in the form of bonds and treasury bills and external borrowing. Measures will be taken during the coming year to improve the functioning of the domestic debt market, to ensure that government can raise funds locally to meet part of its borrowing needs. Externally, the process of negotiating loans with multilateral institutions and other official lenders will continue, with the emphasis on raising loans on attractive terms. Mr. Speaker, this will require more loan authorization bills to be presented for approval to Parliament during the coming year. However, I can assure honourable members that our borrowing will remain not only sustainable and well within the legal limits set by the relevant legislation, but also responsible and channeled to national priorities to reach our national development objectives. Debt levels will therefore remain within the statutory limit of 40% of GDP. In addition, Mr. Speaker, government is in the process of preparing a new medium-term debt management strategy, which will include enhanced debt monitoring instruments. Now I move on to summary and conclusion, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the coming 2022-2023 financial year represents the final year of NDP 11. While some progress has been made, the country still remains far from achieving the objectives laid out in Vision 2036, partly because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also reflecting the continued need for structural reforms. The national priorities laid out in Vision 2036, the midterm review of NDP 11, the ERTP, and the reset agenda remain relevant. This budget supports the pursuit of those priorities and government's efforts to achieve the objectives laid out in Vision 2036 while dealing with COVID-19. Hence, this budget reflects a very delicate balancing act. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to be able to present a budget that entails a somewhat improved fiscal position. The fiscal impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has been to some extent contained, although at the cost of running down the government investment account and modestly increasing our public debt. However, the projected improvement in revenues in 2022-2023 has provided some fiscal space, which we are proposing to use to increase development spending. This enables us to implement projects that are aimed at fulfilling the commitments made in the ERTP, to support the reset agenda, to boost future growth prospects, and maintain social safety nets. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, we are still running a budget deficit, and borrowing is therefore needed to finance part of our spending. Hence, the need to contain spending growth while identifying new sources of revenue alongside sustained cost containment measures, Mr. Speaker. It is also necessary to ensure that spending is well directed to meet national development priorities and to do so efficiently. Mr. Speaker, the preparation of NDP 12 has started and will be conducted through a consultative process based around thematic working groups as usual. NDP 12 will be a crucial transition plan in the achievement of Vision 2036 objectives. As we go into NDP 12, we will need to restore financial buffers by running budget surpluses. Economic shocks such as the global financial crisis and the COVID-19 can appear unexpectedly, and we need those reserves to be able to respond quickly to shocks, as we have done with the current pandemic. Most importantly, however, it remains necessary to undertake economic and institutional reforms that will underpin the improvements in productivity necessary for our journey to high income status as laid out in our Vision 2036. Improving productivity is not, however, a task for government alone, but will require contributions from all of us as we travel this road together. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, Botswana's economic growth and future is dependent on our collective efforts to rebuild and reposition ourselves around the opportunities presented by the COVID-19 pandemic. Though this pandemic challenged our healthcare system and the economy, it has also become a testament to the solidarity of Botswana. It is with that unity that we can now focus on building on our achievements as a nation. Botswana, we must take comfort in the fact that though we have endured in isolation, we can now heal and embrace the return of better days together. Let us carry with us that hope and look forward to a more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable economy. And finally, I wish to remind you that next month, beautiful Pale Samolefe will be representing us at Miss World Finals. Continue to vote for her so that she can reach the top 12. Mr. Speaker, that concludes my presentation. Mr. Speaker, I now move that the Appropriation Bill 2022-2023, Bill 2022, Bill number 2 of 2022 be read a second time. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order, members. The question is that the Appropriation Bill 2022-2023, 2022, Bill number 2 of 2022 be read a second time. As you know, members, in terms of Standing Order 86.2, the debate of the Appropriation Bill shall not commence until one clear day has elapsed, and thereafter for not more than 10 days. This therefore means that the second reading of this bill will start in earnest on Wednesday, the 9th of February 2022. Our members, arrangements have been made for the budget speech for immediate distribution to all our members. And I'm sure to some invited guests I saw in the tent. Our members are also invited for refreshments at the Parliament Gardens, where you usually meet. Members, that concludes what is on today's bit of the paper. I shall therefore call upon the leader of the House to move a motion of adjournment. Your Honor, leader of the House, PP.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to move that this House do now adjourn.
Lui, le va de la puso kan.
PP. Members, thank you. That. Question is that this House do not adjourn. Members, the question is that this House do not adjourn. As many as have that opinion say aye.
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 And the contrary say no.
No. No.
Good for you. And then the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The House is adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister.